of the film, The Colony. You co-wrote, co-writer and director.
Yes.
And talk about the inspiration for the storyline.
You know, it's actually pretty clear because there was a visual trigger that was the very first inspiration. Because I'm from Switzerland, and I know the Swiss mountains, of course, very well. But I've never been to Germany's tidelands. In Germany, there's a certain area, the beaches, where you have these huge tidelands. And I, for the first time in my life, was standing there in that environment. And I saw this endless expanse. It's actually where the movie begins, in this endless expanse of water and puddles and everything. And I knew that it was just the ebb, you know, the low water, the low tide, when I was standing there. And I knew that the next time it will be all flooded within the next 20 minutes or so, and caused by the moon's gravitational effect on Earth. And I thought it's a really interesting location for a sci-fi movie. And I thought, why has there never been a sci-fi movie shot here? Because first of all, you can feel these gravitational effects, but then also it looks like a really strange planet. Could just hear it, because I personally love if there's as much as possible done in camera, where you don't have to use as much, avoid CGI as large as possible. And I thought here you just would have a woman waking in a spacesuit, waking up here, and you would feel like this is a journey maybe on another planet. And it was then in the next step, actually, when co-writer Mariko Minoguchi, who is also a director and a good friend of mine, and we started to think about the story, that we went to the German NASA, I call it, the German Luft- und Raumfahrt, die Deutsche Luft- und Raumfahrt, and we talked to scientists there, and so, and it opened to our eyes something that we knew already, but it just opened to our eyes. They told us, if there's one thing we know about traveling to other planets, is that it's very, very unlikely that we'll ever find a planet within our reach that has these unique conditions as Earth has, where you have for carrying life. And this is when we thought, okay, maybe it might be interesting if while we had a lot of sci-fi movies that telling about leaving Earth and colonizing other planets, it might be interesting to tell a story about, which is actually about the return to Earth.
And I was talking to Nora, and we discussed about the irony that this is kind of like the film is about the aftermath of when there's already been like global warming issues, war, yes, pandemic,
yes,
and just trying to come back after, you know, running away from it.
Yeah, that's what we also thought. This might be an interesting turn. I mean, obviously the movie is not a real, how do you say, a real serious, making a real serious comment about what's happening with climate change or anything. We didn't want to, actually. But I think what is interesting about the genre science fiction is that in a heightened context, you can say something about things that are maybe happening now, and you might, even if it's obvious that it was a fiction or a fictional premise, that you start to think about maybe differently about other stuff that's happening right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, now we know that you picked the location to direct. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. What about the cast? Can you talk about the cast? You had a pretty cool cast.
Yeah, I think so too. Thank you. Well, it was just, in the case of Nora, it was as simple as it is sometimes. We auditioned for, and she made such a great audition. It was already nowadays it's often you have self-tapes first, and it was already really. I was already blown away by the self-tape, and everybody said, "Mike, is this just our Blake?" And then we invited her for direct casting in Berlin, and she just convinced us all. And it's this moment that is really interesting. It happened when you were writing a script, or when Mariko and I were writing, and you think about it, and for the first time, suddenly you believe your own dialogues that you write, because someone is saying it with that so much, so authentic, and yeah, and that was the case of Nora. And so, yeah.
And then what about for Iain Glen?
Well, Iain Glen, we didn't cast because, of course, he's Iain Glen, and and we were just happy that for me, it was I always thought about Ian Glen already when writing, and I found it was just great that he responded very well to the script. I think he also actually told me he responded very well to my debut film. That's what convinced him, actually. He told me, but he might be able to tell you better. that was for him what convinced him to do the movie.
That's great. Yeah, he's always one of the favorites, right? From Game of Thrones.
Yeah, sure. He's just a good guy.
One of the things that I liked about your movie is you had like these women that were, you know, pretty much kicking ass. They were on survival mode and doing phenomenal and kind of sticking together with actions. It wasn't about words.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that you see that you that it's you realize, or that the movie was able, that you got this feeling, because that's what we were talking about a lot about in when we were creating the movie. And actually, it's also interesting that the one of the characters, Navik's character, when we wrote it at the very beginning, she was actually a man. Oh. And it was at a certain point in the writing the story that we just figured out, like, might be interesting if we don't change anything, but it's just it's also a woman. It might be more interesting. So that's maybe why also this constellation, why you got this impression.
You know what? I agree. And to be honest, I thought the one that was like the leader of the tribe was the one that was that Blake is trying to cure, like his face. I thought that was the person.
Ah, okay. No, it was then not. But right. I know why you got this impression, because obviously we don't have many close-ups of these people, and he gets the close-up. But this is also something that we wanted to play around a little bit with, that the audience might think, this is now the leader. But actually wanted to show a society of survivors on Earth where you don't even have the classical leader of a tribe or something. This is a different kind of a community and life that they have.
Mm-hmm. So what was it like to direct underwater?
To be honest, it's really, you know, before we started making the movie, it was clear that it was going to be a lot of water involved. And of course, everyone knows these stories of shootings that were a lot of water involved, you know, the Waterworld, Titanic and everything. And of course we didn't shoot that big of a movie, but still on day 2 shooting with water, I knew why it's so complicated. And especially underwater is super, super complicated, because first of all, everything is slower, because every communication is slower, everything is slower. You wait a lot. As a director, you wait a lot, because obviously there has to be a lot. That's the biggest issue, is security involved, because there have to be security divers and everything. And so these days are really long, and days, it takes a long time to get back to one, to make another take. But I was so lucky enough that my DP, Markus Förderer, who shot it, is a very, he thinks very much in practical, has very practical ideas for movie making, how you can make things very, very simple without using green screen. And he came up with the idea that we just, instead of having this huge, all the time, these huge pools, we have a little pool the size of an aquarium, where camera doesn't need to be in the water. And that's the most important thing about security, is that the actors can get by themselves out of the water. So if they really need to get breath, they can get out of the water themselves. And this is, he came up with this idea to shoot this in this little aquarium. And then at one of the scenes that involved drowning, we shot actually in a really small pool.
I see.
Yeah,
the entire time I was watching the film, I was feeling cold. I was like, it looks
That's good. That's good. So were we while shooting. So it's good. Actually, you felt the same way. Because for us, especially for Nora, I mean, she was soaked every day and was freezing. And she immediately had to go to the warming tent and everything. But I'm a big believer that the struggle, if you tell, I mean, this is a story about an adventure, and the struggle that you have, or that you take as a crew and as actors on making the movie, that hopefully the bigger the struggles, that it will also be reflected on when you watch the movie. And it's nice that you just confirmed this, that you had this feeling that you were feeling cold and everything. And this is certainly also part because we were with the camera ourselves in this cold water and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, you were all cold at parks with experiencing the full experience for sure.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Real quick to wrap
thank
up.
you. I enjoyed this. Thanks,
there's some-
Nancy. And you got it right with what we wanted to say with also with the women and what you just said. So I'm really glad what you how you received the movie.
Great. Well, thank you so much.